And we're back. We are now in Module 8, where we are talking about Congress. Wow, we are really chugging along, aren't we? So, what do we need to know about Congress? Pro is the opposite of con. What is the opposite of progress? Ha ha ha. I'll be here all week. So, Congress, first branch of government, people's branch, because it is the only branch that is directly elected. President is indirectly elected, judiciary, not so much. Obviously, Congress is the legislative branch because it legislates, makes legislation. In other words, passes laws, lawmakers. It is the most democratic and theoretically the most powerful branch of government. There aren't three co-equal branches of government. The legislative branch is the most powerful one, and I can prove it to you. The president or any member of the executive branch gets out of line, Congress can impeach them. They can do the same for federal judges, including Supreme Court judges. Congress can make laws without the president's approval. They can override vetoes. Congress has the power of the purse. Nothing can be done unless they allocate money to pay for it. Even the areas where the president has power, his executive orders, these are powers granted to him, delegated to him by Congress, because Congress created these departments and gave him authority, executive authority over those departments, and that's where his executive authority powers come from. So that power actually originates in Congress. It's just been passed on to the presidency. Congress could take it back at any time if they wanted to. So Congress is the most powerful branch of government, established by Article 1 of the Constitution. So the first article of the Constitution establishes Congress. It is, you probably know, consists of a bicameral legislature, so two-chamber legislature, the House of Representatives and the Senate. It is not completely democratic, of course, because the House of Representatives is gerrymandered, which we've talked about already, and we'll talk about more here. And the Senate is pretty unequal because the smallest state and the biggest state in terms of population both get equal representation there, which basically means that you have more power if you're in Wyoming than you do if you're in California. How do members of Congress, what influences them? Well, their constituents' views, their party views, and their own personal views. And Congress, probably knows, characterized by frequent gridlock, especially during times of divided government. So if one party controls one chamber, another party controls the other chamber, or another party controls the presidency, then getting stuff done is going to be extremely difficult. And it's how it's been throughout history. It's probably gotten worse in recent years to some extent because of increased partisanship and the fact that the parties are farther apart than before. We now have historically, the Republicans had a liberal wing and the Democrats had a conservative wing, but those are pretty much non-existent anymore. So that means that cross-party voting happens a whole lot less. All right, let's talk about the powers of Congress. First of all, there's there's lawmaking. They make the laws. So it is the Congress who passes laws. So this is probably their most obvious power and probably their greatest power. Second one is taxation and appropriation. Money is allocated or appropriated, in other words, directed to be spent for programs that Congress authorizes. Congress raises revenue through taxation and then decides how to spend that money, what to spend it on. They have the power to regulate commerce. According to the Commerce Clause of the Constitution, Congress has the power to, quote, regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and the Indian tribes. So this is a power that has also been expanded due to Supreme Court rulings. But Congress has the exclusive authority to regulate trade between states. And by states, I mean states within the United States. So between Tennessee and North Carolina, for example. Congress has oversight of executive branch appointments and treaties. I should specify that only the Senate has this, not the House. Any high-level executive branch appointment, so cabinet secretaries, must be confirmed by a majority vote of the Senate. The same is true of judges, federal judges. Treaties can be ratified by a 2/3 vote of the Senate. Congress has the power of impeachment. So Congress has the power to remove federal officials and judges for, Constitution puts it, quote, treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Now, it's pretty rare that they use this power, but they do have it. Should a, well, actually, we'll talk about impeachment. Hold up. We'll talk about impeachment when we talk about more about the presidency. But basically, the way impeachment works is the House of Representatives can vote on articles of impeachment. If a majority vote for them, then the president or other federal official, could be vice president, could be a cabinet secretary, could be a judge, is officially impeached. They're not removed from office, though, yet. It then goes to the Senate, where the Senate holds a trial. And at the end, if the trial, if 2/3 of senators vote to convict, then the person is removed. There have been 3 presidents who have been impeached for a total of 4 impeachments, but we'll talk about that when we talk about the presidency. More powers. This is a power that is shared to some extent with the presidency, though it's mostly powers that have been delegated to the presidency. Of course, president is commander-in-chief of the military, but Congress ultimately has the authority to declare war. Of course, the last time they officially declared war was in 1941. They do, though, control the funding still. So theoretically, they could refuse to fund a conflict, which would force us out of that. And we'll talk more about this when we talk about the presidency. According to the Constitution, Congress may, quote, ordain and establish, unquote, courts at levels lower than the Supreme Court. 1789 Judiciary Act also established the federal district courts and circuit courts of appeal. So these districts are created by Congress. So theoretically, Congress could eliminate congressional districts, which is another evidence of why they're the most powerful branch of government. They could undermine the judiciary this way. And generally just oversight. They provide oversight over the executive, judiciary, and the bureaucracy, and hopefully keep them in check. Of course, they are more aggressive in exercising this oversight when there is divided government, when their party doesn't actually control the Congress, the presidency. All right, let's talk about some differences here between the House and the Senate. You want to serve in the House of Representatives, you have to be 25 years of age. In the Senate, you have to be 30 years of age. Otherwise, you have to be a resident of the state in which you're running from, and you also have to be a U.S. citizen. You can be naturalized or natural born. Term of office is 2 years for the House, 6 years for the Senate. Constituency, the people you represent. If you're in a House member, it's a district within a state. If you're a senator, then you represent the entire state. The House of Representatives began with 65 members, but over time it grew as the population grew up until 1929, when it was decided that 435 was enough. And so since 1929, membership in Congress has been capped at 435. So population has more than doubled since then. So in practice, that means that every House member represents more than twice as many people today than they did 100 years ago, which creates the question, should we enlarge the House of Representatives and give members of Congress smaller constituencies? This is an argument which is made in academic circles. I don't know. And actually, I kind of agree that we should, but I also know that practically people aren't going to want to create more politicians typically, so I suspect this will not happen in the near future. Also, both the House and Senate are now directly elected. As we talked about before, until the 17th Amendment, U.S. senators were appointed by state legislatures, but since the early 20th century, they too have been directly elected. All right. Senators generally, we talked about, have more diverse constituencies than House members. Congressional districts, House districts are drawn in a way to make them, frankly, as undiverse as possible. The idea is, because of gerrymandering, we draw, because congressional districts within a state are drawn by the state legislature. So whichever party controls state legislature draws districts to benefit their party. So districts are usually either dark red or dark blue. So safe Republican or safe Democratic. As I said, every 2 years, all 435 House members are up for re-election. However, 20 to 30 of those are actually in competitive races. The others, there's probably a 90% or greater chance that they win re-election. Probably not how it should be, but it is how it is. Senate, the re-election rate's a little lower. It's more like 80%. So still very high. But that's partly because, there is no gerrymandering in the Senate. If you represent a swing state, then election outcomes are in doubt usually. You usually do have competitive races. So places like Georgia, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona. Those are always, Senate races are always going to be targeted by both parties because those outcomes are in doubt. Dark red or dark blue states, not so much. We do a census every 10 years to count the population of each state. We do this so that we will know how many House members they should get. Because remember, states get number of House members proportionate to their population. So we do the census every 10 years on years ending in 0. So the most recent census would have been 2020. And so after the census is done, the state legislatures then redistrict. So if you want your party to gerrymander Congress to benefit you, you want them to have a big year and control as many state legislatures as possible in the year 2020 or the year 2030, because that's when the districts get redrawn. And we talked about this before. Gerrymandering goes back to one of the founding fathers, actually, a guy named Elbridge Gerry, or Gary, we don't actually know how he pronounced it, who was famous for drawing a district in Massachusetts that was shaped like a salamander. So there was a political cartoon that was drawn that referred to it as Jerry Salamander. And gerrymandering became a new word as a result of that, and that's the word we still have. If you look at maps of congressional districts, some of them look pretty bizarre. They're like spread out, long and narrow, and that's so that they will be as dark red or dark blue as possible. All right, so we will come back here and talk about what powers Congress has. We already talked about, actually, and talk about how Congress is organized. So we will see you back here soon.